start off by saying I've been thinking a whole lot about what I want to say tonight, and what I've decided to talk about is how the book came out, because it has not been an ordinary experience, what the book came out of and the actual process of authoring the book. And so I'm going to go back to 1981, where I was in profound pain and deep suffering, to the point where it was clear that, well, I had to deal with something in myself, or I was basically in real trouble. And I don't want to focus on this, but it's important just to create context. I'm an only child, and it wound up that my father was really this very sick man who didn't deal with his own darkness, and the way he dealt with it was just to project out his shadow onto others. And being the only child, at a certain point I became the recipient of that, and that's having everything to do of the suffering that I was in. And it was so intense that I knew I couldn't go on with my life unless I kind of decoded what was happening. And so I went into the suffering in the sense that, I quickly figured out that I couldn't figure my way out of my suffering with my mind. And so then I just stepped back and began to watch what was happening. And that was the only thing that actually in any way made me feel any better. So I began just more and more doing that and just contemplating and watching and witnessing. And then after months and months, we're talking maybe, 18 months, 20 months, something like that, of doing that 4, 5, 6 hours a day, every day, something happened. And one way of describing what happened is that I got hit by this lightning bolt. But it wasn't in the sky, it was inside of my mind, of my brain, just for a nanosecond. And then I went into this altered state. So what I want to do is tell a little bit of the story of what happened next, because it really creates the context for how the book came out. So that next day, I was in such a non-ordinary state compared to my typical conditioned self, that a friend of mine, who I was out in the Bay Area at that point, he was visiting from the East Coast where I'm from, and he thought I was having this psychotic break, which to all appearances, it looked exactly like that, because I was acting a little bit, not like my ordinary self. So he brought me to a hospital, and we were in this hospital in the waiting room, and they checked me out, and then they called an ambulance and brought me by ambulance to this other hospital, where I was admitted to my first mental hospital, psychiatric hospital. And what happened upon entering the psychiatric scene changed my life forever. And what happened was as follows. It was nighttime. They bring me by ambulance to this hospital. They admit me into the psych ward. They bring me into the very first, it's like the lounge for the psychiatric patients, and all the patients are there. And I walk in and I see right away there's one woman, and her eyes are blind. She can't see. Her eyes are just totally, not radiant or transparent. They're just opaque. And I'm not even thinking about what to do at that point. I just am so in the moment, because I really have this deep process of just letting go. And I find myself walking right up to her and staring her in the eyes, and it was like I was given a script to say, and I began saying it like I was a channel for something. When we've all had that experience where all of a sudden just some phrase falls into your head, and that's what was happening. And what the phrase was all you have to do to see is open your eyes and look. And I kept on over and over just saying that phrase as I kept on getting closer to her eyes. The whole thing took maybe not even a minute. And at the end of that minute, she had regained her sight. And as if it was choreographed, at that exact point, the attendants came in and they took me and they brought me to another room and they strapped me up on a bed, you know, legs and hands strapped up. And that's where I spent the night. And, you know, just to comment, it was an interesting night for me, let's put it that way. Because here I was having this mind-blowing spiritual awakening. The experience, the subjective experience I was having was realizing, oh my God, this is a mass shared dream, and I'm beginning to see that, and this experience just happened with the blind woman, and then I began feeling, wow, anybody I would think about, I was imagining that they were coming along with me in the awakening. So I began thinking about all my friends and family, and then I just began more and more extending it until it became all beings that I was just imagining bringing along with me. So then, to make a long story short, the very next day they unstrap me and they bring me into this room, and I'm sitting at a table, you know, I'm in a chair, and the only other person in the room is this woman who's now not blind but can see. And she's smiling at me and not saying a word. And then all of a sudden I understood what had happened the night before, or at the very least from one point of view. My heart chakra just completely blossomed, and I never had that experience so fully. And then I understood, oh, I get it. Her eyes were physically fine, but inwardly she was not letting herself look. And somehow this deeper part of me saw that. And then she says to me, right after I had that insight, she says to me, the only thing that I remember that she ever said to me, she goes, aren't you going to answer the phone call from, and she mentions my father's name. And within, I don't know, seconds, 5-10 seconds, into the room walks the nurse and says, Paul, your father's on the phone, because my parents had gotten word that their only child had had a psychotic break. And so, to make a long story short, I got out of that hospital after 3 days because the doctor in charge of me, he convinced me. He told me that I had to show him that I wasn't crazy, or he was going to keep me there for a long time. And I didn't. At that point, I was so like surrendered that I didn't really care about where I was or what was happening. But when I thought about it, I mean, it was May, spring, it was beautiful outside, and I was thinking, well, I don't really want to stay here. So I just immediately, forced myself back into my typical neurotic identity and began talking about my problems with my father and my guilt and my whatever. And he said to me, fine, you can go, you're normal. That's how I got out of the hospital, And so I got together with this doctor. I called him up and we got together the next week, and I had, what he told me was interesting. He says the fact that I could do that I could be fluid between the identities like that and not just be fixed in a particular, perspective, that was proof to him that I wasn't crazy, and I can appreciate that. And then I told him about the blind woman. He got really uncomfortable and couldn't talk about it, and cited patient confidentiality and all that. And so when I got out of that hospital, I knew, when you have an experience like that, something really profound is happening. When I got out, all of my friends were convinced that I had this nervous breakdown, that I was just, having this denial about my mental illness. I was told I had this chemical imbalance, that I was manic depressive at that point, bipolar. It's what it's called now. And I knew that I had to find somebody to talk to. So within a few days, I was sitting at the feet of the greatest enlightened Buddhist master from Southeast Asia, this 85-year-old master who coincidentally had happened to come into the Bay Area right at that point. And we made this incredible connection that I didn't really understand. And over the next year, maybe 3, 4, 5 other times, I had this propensity to get myself thrown in mental hospitals. And why that was that I was out in the world, and I had tapped into this incredible energy. And that wasn't a personal energy. And I was in the process of integrating it, but I wasn't in a container. I wasn't in an ashram, a monastery, or anything like that. And so I wasn't skillful at being able to creatively express it in a way that wouldn't freak people out, because it was so creative, and I was feeling so unbelievably creative, like I was on the cutting edge of like the Big Bang itself. So a number of times I kept on getting thrown in hospitals, and always diagnosed and then medicated, and my parents bought in, because in their world, if somebody's a doctor, they're an authority, and they have some sort of knowledge or something. And as I kept on getting thrown in hospitals and diagnosed, when somebody's going through an experience like that, it's like your psyche is disintegrating towards potentially a higher integration, in a way almost like your inner constitution is getting like rewritten, and you're in a fragile, very vulnerable state. And as I was getting thrown in the hospitals and diagnosed and pathologized, because what I learned is that psychiatrists are trained to pathologize, the sicker I got. And the sicker I got, the more that confirmed to the psychiatrist the truth of their diagnosis, that I was in fact mentally ill. So they would even see me even more that way, which, I would be influenced by that, and I just got sicker and sicker. And to the point where then when I began actually talking about the abuse with my father, then I got pathologized for that, and it was a nightmare. So one of the contexts out of which this book has come is a direct encounter that I've had in my life with evil. And I'm not saying that psychiatry is evil. So many psychiatrists are beautiful people, well-intentioned. I'm not saying my father was evil. No, he was just playing a role in the family system or in the field. But what I'm saying was that coinciding with the part of me that was awakening was at the same time this other part of me that was having a real direct experience with this dark energy that seemed to be in opposition to the light. And it was really, it got my attention to the point where the whole while I was taking notes and drawing maps of what was happening. I mean, the whole while, like all the mental hospitals I was in, I was doing a self-portrait during each one, like one self-portrait. So that whole part of my life I have, in an image. But it became clear to me. So then by the final hospitalization, which was 82, and the doctors were in complete agreement, I have this mental illness, you're gonna have it for the rest of your life, I'm gonna need to take medication till my dying breath. And I should just, comment that I haven't been on any medication for over 3 decades with no episodes in quotations, and which seems to, be not possible from the psychiatric point of view. Now, the thing I should also say is during that time of all the hospitalizations, like I told that one story with the blind woman, that was not a physically impossible event. That was, and I talk about this in the afterword to the book, that was just a very highly improbable event. But there was stuff that happened in my life that was seemingly totally physically impossible, that was not supposed to be happening in the third dimension that we're in. And it was happening again and again, and I was connecting with these great teachers, with these enlightened beings from Tibet and Burma. And it would typically happen when I would be around them. And now I understand that I was being shown something, and one way of articulating what I was being shown was that this reality that we all are sharing right now is of the nature of some sort of collective dream. That's in a sense the foundation of what the book is pointing at. Now, the book, so it's funny because when I was writing the book, the publisher, they sent me a questionnaire, and one of the questions was, oh, well, what made you write this book? And it really sparked a whole investigation in me, and then it made me really get in touch with what I'm talking about right now, because the thing about what I've understood in my own process is that the way, so many people are interested in, let's awaken or wanting to go towards the light. And one of the things about the light is that it's not of any benefit at all, light, unless it illumines darkness. And what I've learned, and this isn't just me, this is, so many people who are way smarter than me talk about that the way to enlightenment is by making the darkness conscious. And that's what I'm doing, or that's what I'm attempting to do in the book, okay? Now, the Wetiko virus, it's an indigenous Native American term. The Cree Indians would be their term. And it would connote this evil spirit, this cannibalistic spirit. And the more I studied it, the more I understood, oh my God, this is completely mind-blowingly profound. So it's nothing that I discovered. All I'm doing is translating this indigenous wisdom into a modern psychological idiom, okay? Because what I'm pointing at in the book again and again, in as many ways as I can imagine, is that the source of evil that's actually at the bottom of what's playing out in our world, in case people aren't aware of it, we're having a collective psychosis of titanic proportions in which our species, we're killing ourselves. We're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet. Okay? Now, the thing with Wetiko is that, or this evil spirit that's informing what's playing out, is that the origin of it is the psyche. Okay? The origin of it is the collective unconscious, which we all share. And it is, I don't know what are the words to use, it is the trippiest phenomena because its source is in the psyche and it synchronistically explicates itself through the medium of the outside world, which is to say that it's as if this virus that is in the collective unconscious itself somehow extends itself out into the world and actually configures seemingly outer events so as to synchronistically express something that's happening inside of us. Okay, now one other way of saying that is that what's happening in the world is an actual reflection of what's happening inside of us. And when you begin to see that, and if you just step back for a moment, what I just described, that's like a dream. Because what is a dream? A dream is a reflection of the dreamer. Okay? Now, the thing about the Wetiko spirit, this evil spirit whose origin is the psyche, so it's an actual dis-ease of, it's a psycho-spiritual dis-ease of the soul. And one way of understanding it, it's a form of blindness. It's interesting because I think about that woman who was blind. And if I can just go back to that blind woman story and do a quick commentary, I didn't realize it then, but I now know, encoded in that experience with that blind woman was the seed of my whole work. Because she was actually ready to heal, and I was just sent by this, you could say central casting or something like that. I was the one who at that point was open or in the right place at the right time or something, and I said my lines, like I had been practicing for centuries or something. It was kind of odd. But at the same time, she was the blind part of me, who I was helping to heal. So in other words, the two of us, that blind woman and I, were both dreaming each other up into manifestation. And that's one of the ways of describing the essence of my work, and what I talk about in the book, is that we're all dreaming each other up. So this Wetiko virus, it's not an objectively existing virus. It's not something that, oh, we have to be afraid of. In the ultimate sense, it doesn't even exist. It has no intrinsic, independent existence at all, and yet it can destroy our species. That's pointing at something, and that's pointing at the incredible intrinsic power that we all have. Okay, now Wetiko virus, it's not only a form of psychic, of being blind, but it's a blindness that believes that it's sighted, and it arrogantly believes not only that it's sighted, but that it's more sighted than anyone else. Okay, now it works through the unconscious, through the blind spot, and what I'm describing, I totally would bet all the money I have that every one of us experiences this in our lives. Because the way the Wetiko virus works, when we're unaware of it, we then unwittingly become an instrument through which it acts itself out in life. And simultaneously, while doing that, it hides itself from being seen. Okay? Now, to say a bit more, because it's such an amazing thing when you begin to see it. You see, it can only work and operate in its sinister ways when we don't see it. When we see it, and that's what this book is about, is trying to again and again point at it and say, look how it operates. It has no power, and not only when we see it, it has no power, but then we become empowered in the process, okay? So, the Wetiko virus, it operates through the psyche, through our unconscious blind spot, in such a way that it works through the projective tendencies of our mind, because we're always projecting, we're always connecting the dots on the waking ink blot to create our particular experience, and then we'll have a meaning in our experience. But the way it'll work is that, so the Wetiko virus will operate through the projective tendencies of our mind in such a way that then we perceive reality and then think that it objectively exists separate from us, which we then react to, thinking that we're reacting to reality when we're actually reacting to our own projection, our own mind. Okay? One other way of understanding it is when you're in a dream, in a night dream, right? If you have a particular viewpoint in that night dream, the night dream has no choice but to instantaneously shapeshift and reflect back to you your viewpoint. Because what is the night dream but your own mind, right? And if you think about that, so if you change your viewpoint in that night dream, the night dream has no choice but to spontaneously shapeshift and reflect back your change in perspective. So, if we're split off from a part of ourselves, say if we're split off from our own evil, and then of course, what do? Our shadow, our evil, we just project outside of ourselves. And, going back to that dream, which is none other than our own mind, into the dream will walk somebody or a group or a nation or whoever who will embody and incarnate and carry our projection. And now we have evidence, now the darkness is really outside of myself, so we become even more entrenched in the viewpoint that the evil is outside of ourselves. And the more we do that, the more the evil in the dream will appear very convincingly as evidence that it really is outside of ourselves. And it becomes a self-perpetuating feedback loop, which if we don't see through it, we then unwittingly become an instrument for the propagation of the Wetiko virus. Okay? Another way of understanding Wetiko, it's like who we are these geniuses. We are geniuses as far as how we co-create reality. The Wetiko bug co-opts our genius and turns it against us in such a way that we create a reality that not only is not serving us, but is killing us, okay? What I point at in the book, you see, the thing about Wetiko, it's a virus of the mind, but unlike a typical virus will mutate when you create, when you have new antibiotics to try to kill it. Well, the Wetiko virus won't mutate, it forces us to mutate. One of the main conclusions in the book is that encoded in the evil of Wetiko is not only its own antidote, but is a blessing. That it's actually helping us to wake up. That it's showing us something, that as we get taken over by it, and we get taken over by it whenever any of us falls into our unconscious and acts out our unconscious, or acts out compulsively, or our habitual patterns or addictions, we're actually at that point agents for Wetiko. And yet, encoded in our acting out the unconscious, something is being revealed to us through that. And so everything depends on if we have the recognition of what's being shown to us, okay? It's very quantum in the sense that, think about what is the nature, like if you contemplate light, and quantum physicists have discovered, oh wow, under certain circumstances light will manifest as a particle, other circumstances it'll manifest as this wave. It depends how you observe it. And they've discovered, oh, from that point of view, this world we live in, it makes no sense at all to talk about this world as having any objective existence whatsoever as separate from the observer, in the same way that it makes no sense at all to talk about the observer separate from this world. The observer is the observed. And so the Wetiko virus is quantum in that, is it destroying our species or is it waking us up? It depends how we dream it. It's a dreamed up phenomena, okay? And everything depends if we have the recognition of what it's showing us. Now, a lot of people, some very well-intentioned people, are very interested in spirituality. They don't want to talk about evil. They don't want to think about evil. And and I understand if you get too fascinated with evil, it's not a good thing. It feeds it. And even mentioning the word evil, it's in the subtitle of my book. It's an edgy thing because just even mentioning the word triggers people and actually almost invokes a certain aspect of that quality. But yet, almost like homeopathy, you have to take in something in yourself to find the cure, because the evil we're seeing out in the world, when I say that Wetiko is a synchronistic, it operates synchronistically, collapsing the boundary between the inner and the outer, the evil we see in the world is actually a reflection of the evil that exists in us. And if we get too entranced in trying to destroy the evil out there and projecting our shadow and trying to destroy that darkness as it manifests in the world, we then become possessed by that very evil, okay? So the point is that one of the things that Wetiko is showing us is our own darkness, our own evil. And one other thing Wetiko is showing us is that, you see, you can't see Wetiko at all. It's invisible as long as we're identified with a separate self, with an isolated, alienated, skin-encapsulated, egoic self that exists separate from anybody else. And that's a lot of our almost habitual, typical identity pattern, is to identify ourselves as being an ego. But when you have the viewpoint of that separate self, you can't see Wetiko. It makes no sense at all. But in physics, they talk about the field, the non-local field, and that word not being local, non-local, it's a physics term which means that the third dimensional laws of space and time are transcended. They don't hold. And this physics has discovered that this world we live in is non-local. The implication is there's no separation anywhere, that everything is connected with everything else, okay? And so if we think, oh, that person, that bad guy, that terrorist, that whoever, fill in the blank, that they're evil, if we hold that viewpoint, we've then fallen under the spell of Wetiko, because Wetiko feeds off of not only fear, but polarization. If we think that the evil is outside of us, or if we concretize somebody as being evil, that's the way Wetiko is hiding through our perception. So when I say you can't see Wetiko if you're identified with the separate self, you actually begin to see Wetiko when you begin to recognize the non-local field that's underlying and informing and synchronistically pervading all of reality. And when you see that non-local field, that's to begin to discover the dreamlike nature of reality, because you begin to realize we don't exist in isolation, but we exist, we're interconnected and interdependent with each other. And the others that we're interconnected and interdependent with, they don't exist as an actual isolated, independent, separate entity, but they exist in relation to other interdependent, interconnected people. We all exist in this web of this reciprocal, this mutual interrelationship, interdependence, interconnection. When you see that, that's to snap out of the separate self, and the expression of that realization is compassion. So compassion is the Wetiko dissolver par excellence. Now, in the book I go into all of this, and I point out that, wow, from one point of view, we wouldn't have had these realizations without Wetiko. That it was the very stimulant that's prodding us, that's inspiring us to actually cultivate our compassion and to wake up and to discover who we are. So then all of a sudden you begin to realize, wait, I thought Wetiko was like the darkest evil. Well, it is. And yet it's bringing about the highest good. Well, it does. Well, I thought good and evil were total opposites. Well, from one point of view they are, but in the book I introduce a higher form of this logic, a four-valued logic, which is different than a two-valued logic where things are either good or bad. And I'm not going to explain that, it's a little bit complicated, but I go into that in the book. Now, just to come full circle, everything that I'm talking about now and what I've written in the book has come out of those experiences of the abuse with my father and the psychiatric hospitalizations and the abuse. Like, psychiatry literally almost killed me. Not only did they pathologize me and diagnose me and medicate me and abort my spiritual awakening, they didn't have any idea that there was such a phenomenon. This was, in '81, that they didn't even know that there was such a phenomenon as spiritual awakening. And interestingly, they protected my father, who was actually, it came out later, was a bad guy and was, enacting abuse. That's really interesting, because I noticed over the course of my life that there's this process that happens when there's some sort of abuse that happens in the field, some sort of darkness that's manifesting, the field will configure in a way to protect the abuser. I mean, there are numerous examples. Think about the Catholic Church or the Boy Scouts or Penn State, on and on. It's that same deeper process. So I'm not interested in concretizing anybody as being evil. I'm just pointing out there's a deeper archetypal process, a higher dimensional process, and this is the realm of Wetiko, that is formless, it's invisible, and yet it actually will manifest in the realm of form. I would say to them that unwittingly, with the best of intentions, you are being a conduit for the evil of Wetiko to play out in your avoidance. Because Wetiko plays out through our blindness, through our looking away. When you see the way Wetiko operates through your own psyche, through the non-local field, through inner relationships with each other, it has no power. It just will dissolve into the emptiness out of which it arose. Ultimately, it doesn't exist. And if we don't have the recognition of what it's showing us, it's going to kill us. It's like it's like this lethal mirage, which actually doesn't exist but can literally kill us. Okay? So one of the things that I'm trying to get across in the book is to introduce the word Wetiko into just our vocabulary. That we actually begin, because in mythology, one way of describing Wetiko, it's like a demon. And a demon, psychologically, Jung calls it an autonomous complex. It's a part of our psyche that's split off and seems to have an autonomy, an independent will or life of its own, but it's actually ultimately part of us that we're not associated with, that we've split off. So an autonomous complex is a demon. Well, in mythology, they talk about that, well, what do you do with demons? You find its name. You have to find its right name, its proper name. And when you find its name, you take away its power. Okay? So that's one of the things I'm trying to do through this book. Because what I'm pointing out is that, and then I just want to invoke, as we get closer to closing, the divine creative imagination. Because it's through the imagination that Wetiko works, and it's through the imagination that it actually gets healed. So, if we can imagine for a second, just imagine that you're in a dream at night, okay? And in an ordinary dream, you typically don't know, unless you're really fortunate, that you're dreaming. You actually think it's real. You think the environment is objective and solid, and that you exist as the dream ego. In the dream, that's who you're imagining you are. And but say something happens in the dream that actually helps you to recognize the nature of your situation. That is, that you're dreaming, and you wake up in that dream, not out of the dream, but you wake up in the dream, and you have the lucidity of like, oh my God, now I recognize the nature of my situation. I'm dreaming. And what have you had the recognition of? Is that, oh, who you've been imagining you are, of the dream ego, this limited ego in the dream, is not who you are. That's just a model for who you are. That's just who you actually are, is the dreamer of the dream. And you realize the dreamer of the dream is not separate from the whole dream. And all of a sudden you realize, well, all of the dream characters in that dream, they're parts of you. And and that's where the compassion comes in, right? But let's invoke that imagination once more. Now imagine you have that experience in a night dream, that you recognize you're dreaming. You have lucidity. And then imagine you connect with another dream character in that dream who's also realizing that they're dreaming. And they also recognize that what they're experiencing is just their own energy, their own mind, that they're not out of their mind, but they're inside their mind. Okay? Now imagine not just two people, but what would you imagine would happen if there were 10 or 100 or 500 people in that night dream who all were having that lucidity and all connecting with each other and putting their realization together and contemplating what they're realizing. Oh my God, this is all a dream. This is a mass shared dream. The way it's manifesting is a function of how we dream it. It's nothing other than our own consciousness materialized into form. Okay? And I would then suggest that in that imagination, that those dreamers who are awakening to the nature of their situation could discover that they could change the dream. Particularly when they put what I call their sacred power of dreaming together. Now, that was just a description of a night dream. And what I'm suggesting in the book, and I go into this during a lot of the second half of the book, is that what I just described is actually the nature of our situation right now in the waking dream. That as more and more of us wake up, we can connect with each other through that open heart of lucidity and compassion, where we recognize we're not separate, and we could, it's what I call conspire to co-inspire. It's a true conspiracy theory. And we can dream ourselves awake. And this is an evolutionary impulse offered to us by the universe that we're invited to partake. And if people tell me, "Oh, you're just dreaming, Paul," I would say, "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about," And there is something, when we come together in a certain way, we can activate the collective, the genius in all of us, and absolutely change the world. And that's what's actually not just offered to us, but it's being demanded of us by Wetiko. Because, for those of us who aren't just, ostriches and having a blind eye, there's this incredible, deeper, not just personal, but archetypal evil that's playing out all throughout the world. And there's something that's being shown to us. And that's what I'm trying to talk about in the book. And if I can just close with a short dream, and I tell this dream in the book, at least just a little bit of it. In this dream, I had this dream the morning two of my teachers, these great, enlightened bodhisattvic beings from Tibet, were coming for a visit. So I think I had a lot of energy, and I got woken up that morning by this incredible dream. And the dream was, I and a whole bunch of us, we were looking for a vampire. And we were trying to find this vampire. And we were all chanting in the dream, Bela Lugosi, Bela Lugosi, And then I see the vampire, I see Dracula. And I point them out to everybody else in the dream, and no one else can see him. And then I wake up. Okay, now how come I tell that dream? Is because I'm in my imagination, I'm actively imagining that dream in my life. And as I've gotten more in touch with my own self, I've developed a fluency or an ability to articulate the way to see that vampire. And that's what this book is. And so I want to thank you very much for coming. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer some questions. Yeah.
How does this tie in with John Lamb-Lash's archons? Is there a connection there?
Yeah, totally. The archons of the Gnostics, of John Lamb-Lash, that's exactly, as far as my understanding, that is analogous to Wetiko. Because if people aren't familiar with the archons of the Gnostics, who the Gnostics are, they're the ones who know. That's the definition of the term. And they were tracking that there was this malevolent force that was actually, that people who had ignorance and unconsciousness, it wasn't just they didn't know, but that there was some sort of malevolent force that was stopping them from knowing, and that if people did wake up and know, this malevolent force would be dissolved. So that's one very simple way of describing the archons, and that's exactly, Wetiko. The thing I should point out is that so many, every wisdom tradition I'm familiar with talks about Wetiko in their own way. So in the book, I talk a lot about Tibetan Buddhism, mystical Christianity, shamanism, the alchemical arts, quantum physics. They all, in different ways, are pointing at Wetiko. And even as I'm saying this, I can, at least in my imagination, feel Wetiko not very happy with me, because I'm like outing it. I'm like really pointing at it. And so thank you. Yeah.
Would you get mad at me if I called this wet ego?
No, I don't mind at all.
Because the reason I'm saying that is because ego to me is very much like what you're talking about. The
Yeah.
ego self was a survival mechanism that's in the brain,
Right.
compared to the spirit that's in the heart.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind whether people call it, whether how they pronounce it. I talk about that in the book, and I've given it a whole different name in my Bush book, and but I don't mind at all, and I think it's not important how you pronounce it. And one of the examples I'll use in Sanskrit, there's the word Vajra, the indestructible thunderbolt, and it's like the scepter that the Lama, the Guru, holds, and the Tibetans call Vajra Bedzar. And it's the way, we all have different ways our winds pass through our channels, so to speak, that in which we form language. So whether we call it Windigo, Wetiko, I don't care. Yeah.
I was just shamelessly trying to be a little bit funny, but it does remind me of the ego.
Sure. No, I hear that. Thank you. Yeah.
Have you always been a natural public speaker, or how did you develop the courage to openly talk about?
My biggest fear growing up was public speaking. I have always been terrified of it, and which is so bizarre because it's now one of the things that I do for a living, and I still get kind of anxious around it. But what I've learned to be able to do, because I'm getting so many interviews now with the book coming out, is that to be able to tap into that nervous energy and maybe hopefully transmute it into some form of excitement. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Are phobias Wetiko, and were you being sabotaged by Wetiko with your fear of speaking when you were younger, number one? And then my second question is, what's up with the trendiness of zombies and vampires?
Yeah. And I would say anything like phobias, anything that's obscuring or in nature. You see, the one thing that I forgot to mention is probably the most important thing in the whole book, so thanks, Jeremy, is the greatest protection against Wetiko, or another way of saying that is that the way to vanquish evil, or the evil of Wetiko, because if we fight against it, we've already lost. That's its game. The way to vanquish the evil of Wetiko, so really, I want everybody to listen, because this is it, right? Is to find the place in yourself that's invulnerable to its effects. And that's the true nature, okay? And when you connect with that, like for example, and the thing with the phobia, that's, anything that is obscuring our nature, or that compulsively just, where we become obsessed or possessed by something, that's a manifestation of Wetiko. But like one quick story, so one of my teachers came to Portland a number of years ago, this great enlightened being from Tibet. I'm really fortunate having some great, amazing teachers, and he was giving an empowerment, and the empowerment is this, it's a ceremony where he transmits blessings, and he was giving a blessing particularly to dispel black magic. And I've never seen anything like it. We had to turn people away. There were so many people who came, wanted to get that blessing, that we didn't have space. And in the blessing, he really made something very clear. He said, look, this blessing will not dispel black magic. This blessing will dispel your belief in black magic, because that is the black magic. If you think there's something actually objectively existing called black magic, then you've already fallen under the spell. So I just wanted to say that. So, any other questions? Yeah.
It would be nice if there was some group that was formed to help people kind of wake up in this dream.
Yeah, I don't know, Justin. That's funny. Wow. Okay. So one thing, I'm in Portland. I think you all know that, and I have these groups, and they're all based on people who are actually plugging into that we are dreaming and are awakening in the dream. They're amazing groups. They're very, let me say, psychoactive in that they activate the psyche. And I've been doing it, it's from, 94 or something. And so if anybody's interested in that, you can email me, or my card's over there, or just be in touch. And, thank you, Justin, I appreciate it. Any other questions before we close?
Paul, I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you aware that there are pieces of the story of Wetiko that, as they unfold, need to be timed precisely so that people can embrace them as opposed to be falling into a deeper sleep?
Well, it's funny, that makes me think of the thing about Wetiko, it's an expression, it comes out of the atemporal dimension, the part of our being that's not bound by space or time. And I'm not quite sure how to answer what you're asking, but it does bring up, I'll just associate. I'll just imagine that we're having a dream right now, okay? And I'll just associate. And that is that in spiritual traditions, or at least in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that I'm familiar with, there are these treasures, these spiritual treasures, that you could say the great enlightened being itself planted in the world, whether it be in the land, in the sky, in water, or in our mind. And then at a certain point, something will happen. And we're talking, these treasures will be planted at a particular moment in time, even though they're sources from outside of time. And then the person who's fated, who has a destiny to discover these treasures, will then discover them sometimes centuries after they're planted. And it's like this like vitamin, this multivitamin, where it'll be exactly what's needed at that moment in time to help people awaken. And this always interested me. I actually wrote an article about this very thing. It's on my website. And because, like, I'll just give you an example. Say if tomorrow I have to remember something. And I don't know about anybody else, but as I'm getting older, my memory is not working as good as it used to. And so, what I've actually, a strategy I'll use, I'll take something and I'll put it in front of the front door that I know I'm going to leave my front door to go to get my coffee. By the way, this whole book was written Sound Grounds Cafe, 37th in Belmont, the best cafe in the universe. It's on film. That's where this book was written, every morning for 5 months. And so, but I'll put something in front of that door, and then as I'm staggering out in the morning to get my double Americano, I'll see the object right in front of the door, and it'll remind me, oh yeah, I need to get that thing, whatever that thing is. And that interests me because, so here's a present self that's doing something in this moment, i.e. putting something in front of the door to communicate to a future self, to help it remember something. So just with that as a contemplation, it makes me think, oh, I wonder if there's like a deeper self in us that's actually setting up our life in a way, in this similar way, to help us to remember stuff at exactly the right time. So that's kind of what your question brings to mind. I have no idea if that answers your question, but I appreciate that it brought that out, so thank you. So how about like one, let's see, or we have like a couple of minutes. Yeah.
I very much appreciated your talk tonight.
Okay.
Connecting lots of dots. And I'm wondering, with the taping, will this be available for us to share with people that couldn't make it here today?
Yeah, that's the point. No, I appreciate that. So this tape is going to be available on my website and on like my Amazon. There's an author page, the internet, the YouTube channel or whatever it's called. I'm pretty new to the internet thing,
Your website, we can get this talk.
Yeah, I would say check back to my website probably within a week or whatever. It's going to be edited, and then it'll be available. The whole point of it being filmed is I wanted to share this, not just with all of you, but for whoever is interested, who are not just in Portland. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
So what do you plan to write next?
Well, it's interesting. Okay, I do have something in mind. Of course, this is like my worst nightmare, right? Right after I finish the book, I come across some books that I'm like, rats, why didn't I find these books before I finished my book? And it's about the Kabbalah. And for people who know, and I've known a little bit about the Kabbalah, but as I've, in the last number of weeks, been studying the Kabbalah, and particularly that the vessels get broken, and the light gets scattered, and it's hidden all throughout, existence, and that it's by going into the darkness and through evil that you actually are able to retrieve the light. And it's a whole other way, it's a creative way of articulating exactly what I've been experiencing and what we all experience, and what the book that I just wrote is about. So, I've been imagining, maybe even tomorrow, because I've been like just getting so activated whenever I read about the Kabbalah, I'm like, oh my God, I can barely contain myself, So I think I'm going to have to write about it. Yeah, so thanks, Tamara. Yeah.
Can you tell us what it feels like to be awake?
For my first thought is I wouldn't know, but yeah, that's a trick question. I want to say too, but anyway, I'm sorry.
You talked about your psychotic break.
Right.
How you had to fashion yourself back into this normal.
Normal, right? Totally.
So tell us about that then.
Oh, that was horrible. That really, all anybody needs, because there are so many people who are institutionalized and are locked up, who I think are having spiritual emergences and awakenings and are not recognized and are diagnosed and pathologized, and their whole deeper mystical awakening experience is then shut down and aborted, and it's tragic. So for me, honestly, I'm still, we're all in the process of awakening. I'm in no way saying, oh, I'm like an awake person. People who know me can validate this for sure. I'm continually falling asleep and then waking up, but the point is that, when I do get caught or seemingly fall asleep, one of my practices is to really try and reflect and to self-reflect and to see the asleep part of me, But I would like to, just one final thing, I would like to say, my God, if you were to meet my teachers, now I feel, they would be the people to answer that question. So thank you. Okay, one final question, yeah.
Just to add to what I like your question a lot, and I'm trying to think, awakening seems to happen when we're in contact with our in one of our higher chakra spaces.
Yeah, well, what that makes me think of is, it's funny because, and this is important, I think, at least for some people to hear, there's a correlation between having abuse and being wounded and traumatized and awakening. There's a real correlation. Because when you get traumatized or a victim of abuse or wounded, and who among us has not had those experiences, a part of us splits off. And then we become disassociated from a part of ourselves. That activates the archetype of the shaman. The shaman is then somebody who then goes off in search of the part of themselves that's like frozen back in time, and that's disassociated from their wholeness, and they're able to bring hopefully to retrieve, to remember that split off part of themselves back into their wholeness. And in a sense, what I'm describing, that's all of us. All of us are shamans in training, and you could even see the collective. What's happening collectively in our world is we're having this collective nervous breakdown, and it's a shamanic initiation, which is a death rebirth experience. And the death is the death of the separate self, and the actual birth is the birth into a more expanded consciousness where we recognize our interdependence, interconnectedness with each other and with all things. And just one final thought, bodhisattva, the word bodhisattva, my favorite definition of the word bodhisattva is a being in the process of awakening. And who among us is not in the process of awakening? And the idea of a bodhisattva is that instead of putting our attention on our own narcissistic self and our own suffering, by actually being here for the service of others, paradoxically, that's the very stance that alleviates our own suffering. So I want to thank you all very, very much. Thank you.